we're good.
All right, so this is our final FMS project. All right, so this is just a quick review of the clinical history. As you can see, the most of the injuries have occurred in the right ankle, especially due to a recent grade 2 ankle sprain that happened a couple months ago. Okay, and then you go to the next slide. And then this is just a review of the movement history. Played football, basketball, soccer, and baseball as a kid and skateboarded between 8th and 10th grade. Played 4 years of high school football and did a little bit of yoga during 11th and 12th grade. So these are the current movements of my daily life right now. So I average about 3 to 6 hours of sleep a night. I spend about 2 hours a day driving to and from work. It could be a little bit longer on days that I have school and have to go to campus. So that could add another hour and a half to that. I spend about approximately 5 to 6 hours a day sitting due to homework and studying. But I do spend a high amount of time walking at work. And then whenever I'm at school, I take the stairs to classes, and I just take the stairs in general wherever I go. I am a side sleeper, and right now I currently do resistance training about 2 to 3 times a week for roughly 45 minutes to an hour.
This is a sagittal view of the first screening of the deep squat. In this one, you could see the trunk leans forward, and then he has a problem with depth in these. He could barely make it to parallel, sometimes not even. There's a frontal view. With this one, you see his knees are shaking, and then he goes into slight valgus as well. It's the hurdle step sagittal view. For this one, you can see he's unstable on one leg, and then he has a slight hyperlordotic movement of his back. It's the frontal view of the hurdle step for the first screening. In this one, you see external rotation, eversion of the foot, and then slight instability as well when he's on his single leg. The inline lunge sagittal view, first screening, instability on his right ankle, and he's very shaky during these lunges. Frontal view of the inline lunge. This one, his ankle mobility is a problem, and you can see his foot poking out in the back. It's because his wider base of support, and he's very shaky in these as well. Active straight leg raise first screening. For this one, you can see the pelvic instability, slight external rotation, and then the ankle didn't get past the dowel in these ones. And this is just an overall review of everything. This is knee valgus in the squat, his weak posterior muscles, and ankle mobility, stability restrictions, and core stabilizer weaknesses.
All right, so for our exercise prescription program, throughout each of the 6 weeks, we focused on overall progression. So for week 1, we regressed the eccentric kneeling quad extension by adding a counterbalance, and we regressed the gait with water walking. And for week 2, we lessened the weight of the counterbalance for progression with the eccentric kneeling quad extension, and we also increased the weight for the banded ankle rehabilitative exercises. Moving on to week 3, the next step is further progression through lessening the counterbalance once more. And then we also progress the glute bridges through banded marching and lateral walking. And then there's further progression on ankle rehabilitation. And we also added emphasis on core work for stability, and we had to regress single leg stability on the Bosu ball due to lack of balance. As for week 4, we increased the resistance of the band, and the main difference of this week was adding the Nordic hamstrings and the RDLs. As for week 5, we increased the weight, we added squats. However, for the squats, we noticed there was a butt wink. So we added lat pull downs and pull-ups to add lat stabilization for our pelvis. And for week 6, last but not least, we mainly focused on heavier weight, and overall week 6 was catered towards all around progression with an emphasis on improving strength through increased heavy resistance training. And the exercise prescription program we give to our subject is catered to rehabbing the injured right ankle along with attacking the posterior chain in hopes of decreasing hip hinge during the deep squat. So this is the deep squat for our second screening. And for this one, this is the deep squat again for the second screening. However, we have the compensation. As you can see, there's more improvement with the compensation. And for deep squat analysis, there's less knee valgus, more depth during the squat, but Wink has also noticed that the full depth of the squat, there's also less hip hinge during the squat with heel lift, which is a big improvement from the first screening of the initial FMS. There's also thoracic rotation is still evident. And this is a hurdle step. So when analyzing the hurdle step got better on both legs with less side motion during the lifting phase of the leg, although there was tight hamstring or overactive superficial hip flexor before. And the RDL, the Nordic hamstring curl, and the GHD hamstring eccentric are exercises that can fix this compensation, and tight quad muscles would lead to hyperlordosis. So hyperlordosis is not as prevalent as it was in the first screening of the FMS, and it might be because we strengthened the posterior chain.
All right, we have the inline lunge sagittal view for the second screening. In this one, you could just see it's much smoother than the first one. And then there's a slight raise in his right foot during these ones. And this one in the frontal view, you could see his feet and knees actually stay in line much better than before. And his trunk is actually much more upright than it was in the first screening.
All right, for the active straight leg, we can see that there's increased range in the leg being raised, so the malleoli completely goes past the dowel. There's less external rotation of the foot during the active straight legs, and that could be due to more pelvic stability that he's gained. And one cause for bad active straight legs could be the tight superficial hip flexors, causing hyperlordosis, which was addressed inside the exercise program. So the highlighted in the main exercises are that we think contributed to the improvements of the deep squat, inline lunge, hurdle step, and the active straight legs. So one of them was the hip flexor stretch, and this one was to eccentrically stretch the hip flexors as well as strengthening them, because we think that might have caused the hyperlordosis, which affects the straight leg and hurdle step. For the banded glute walks, this was mainly to attack the glute med for frontal plane stabilizer, which addressed the valgus knee movement, and the progressions made were increasing the weight of the band. As for ankle rehab, the main contributors we think were the banded plantar eversions and inversions, and the goal of this was to help break down scar tissue as well as strengthening the ankle in multiple planes of motion. What was not recorded was the water walking, which was a great regression for gait and for initial use of the ankle. So this is the banded eversion. Again, progressions made were increasing the weight of the band. As for the hamstring exercises, we had the Nordic hamstring curls as well as RDLs. So these were to eccentrically landing the hamstrings for the active straight leg to loosen up the hamstrings as well as to strengthen the posterior chain, which we thought would help with the hip hinge during the deep squat. And these workouts actually did improve the active straight legs by loosening the hamstrings. And lastly is the lat pull down, which we noticed in week 5, there's a little butt wink, and adding the lat pull down would increase in pelvic stability along with the pull-ups that we added.
So overall progression, regressions, and changes that were part of the program were with the banded activities that were progressed by increasing the weight of the band each week. That was used for ankle flexibility and increasing glute med and max activation. And then for single leg squat, it was regressed by adding a box and a dowel, and the dowel was used to help activate core stabilizers and help with stability. And then it was progressed by adding a Bosu ball in the later half of the program to increase ankle mobility and increase glute med and activation and quad strength. And then water walking was a regression for gait for the recent ankle injury. And then as noted before, we added the lat pull downs and we noticed the butt wink with increased squat depth to help increase the stabilization of the pelvis from going to posterior pelvic tilt and preventing hyperlordosis. And then after the FMS, the hip hinge was still in a deep squat, did not get better. And reasons why we think this happened was because we may have attacked the problem the wrong way by strengthening the posterior chain. And that could be because I could possibly be a glute dominant mover or hamstring dominant mover. So we should attack, if we were to do this again, we would attack more glute quad strengthening. And then another issue why this may have happened was adherence was an issue because I went on a trip and I helped my parents move and move myself, so I was unable to complete the program fully. And then, so what could change? So less focusing on strengthening the posterior chain with the hip hinge. It could be because of the weak knee extensors that does not include mobility, and exercises that we can add would focus more on the knee extensors, such as Bulgarian split squat and an increasing progression on kneeling quad eccentrics, split squats and lunges. And then for mobility improvement, we didn't have many exercises that deal with it, but if we were to do this again, we will incorporate more stretching and increase exercises with the Bosu ball to help with flexibility, stability, and mobility.